This is Chirag. He is the founder of an AI legal startup.
Let's think about the life of an associate for a second. Nobody wants to do that routine work.
In this episode, I asked Chirag if AI will kick lawyers out of a job.
That will start going away a bit because it doesn't make sense from their incentive perspective.
And we discussed where the AI legal space is going in the future.
I'll break it down into 3 different pieces.
This was a super in-depth interview. I really wish I had some more time to ask questions. I hope you liked it. Could you explain to me exactly how AI will transform the legal space?
AI in general, is now at a stage where it's starting to understand human language. And just by virtue of understanding that human language, legal, which, is trying to sort of remove that ambiguity and produce sort of contracts or agreements between different parties, which based on very specific requirements of that language, they can just offload a lot of that work to the AI by virtue of it understanding. So it's almost like everyone has an intern of their own, wherein they can start delegating work that they did not find a lot of time or use in because it was repetitive or routine or something that they've already answered in previous documents. They can start getting that into the workforce.
So like what's like a specific task that an AI could do right now?
I'll go a bit before, just set up a bit more context around what AI couldn't or what didn't require AI and was still useful. Mm-hmm. So things like automatically generating documents through templates, like you fill in certain forms and that automatically gives you the contract. But that had some issues of like the business person knowing what type of contract they're looking for and answering way too many questions, which required some knowledge. For example, say if they want an NDA, they now need to understand what is the purpose of the NDA. And based on that purpose, an attorney will be able to understand whether it's very early stage. That is, you just want to demo the product. So it needs to be a very simple NDA that just probably goes through. And there's not so much risk because the demo is already kind of public. But if you're at a later stage of an agreement, that is, you're now going to get some sensitive data from the other party, you need that NDA to be much more tight. So even inside an NDA, there can be so many different ways. And now that onus of the business user understanding and explaining that to an attorney starts to go away because now the interface between them is much more intelligent. They can just type in that this is the stage, blah, 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 and it will automatically fill in the information that's required. And that takes away a lot of work that from the legal departments, which are already extremely overburdened.
Is this, so you're talking like document generation?
Yeah. So this is more of the document generation piece of it and the workflow part of things that's more relevant to the in-house legal departments, but also to law firms. So for law firms, that problem is actually even greater because for that same document, they will have different industries with their own nuances, different sizes of companies with their own nuances, like their play in the whole negotiation aspect changes. Like AWS can push through much stronger terms than a very new startup can. So those kinds of power plays change, and I think their problem gets even more complicated. What it's called in legal departments called knowledge management, where I'm getting to. So it's not just document generation. At the end of it, it's collecting all the knowledge that is covered by the legal department or the law firm and presenting that in each work product that they're generating.
Do you think in this space, is that the only thing that's going to get better? Like, are we just, going to just work on document generation and just, keep refining the models and keep making it better over time? Or is there something, cooler in the future that we might see that is not unlocked yet with AI?
Yeah, so I'll break it down into 3 different pieces of law which usually gets impacted. One is the litigation and dispute resolution. That is sort of you going to court, forming cases, doing a lot of discovery phase of the whole case. That is, there will be a big document dump on you. And right now it's very keyword based and there are experts where e-discovery is a big skill. That will start going away a bit where because that those keywords, just say perplexity, it can be generated. What are the probable things that people will be talking about? So that will become easier talking to big, large documents. Then there's other parts of there's some repetitive documents like dockets that are created in that legal dispute resolution that will also start going away. The second part is IP and portfolio management, as filing patents, getting patents done, answering to request for evidence. And a lot of the patents right now, even after they are granted, they're disputed, and a lot of money is actually lost on them, because even the job of a patent attorney is quite hard to go through and say the nuances of biochemistry and figuring out that this particular new molecule is actually unique compared to everything else that has been done in history before. So that will start going away as well, where patents will actually mean a lot more and will be easier to get as well. Hopefully, right now it takes about 18 months. I expect that time to go like significantly lesser because that research is easier.
Uh-huh.
And then the third part is the commercial aspect, which was say contracting or like one company trying to buy another. And that in those spaces, it will be very focused on workflow management and sort of getting closing the sales deals or any kind of deal much quicker than it used to, because the repetitive task is kind of taken care by AI, and you don't need to like wait for to get simple answers from the AI. So one example there is that say for an M&A, only about 30% of the contracts are actually reviewed. They just take a top X amount of in terms of contract value, and only those are sort of vetted. And that's because it's kind of limited and the cost benefit analysis doesn't line up. So now you'll probably get a much better and much bigger coverage of contracts. Like instead of 30, you'll probably get to 60 or 90% because it's cheaper to review each contract.
So isn't it inevitable that there'll be a reduction of workforce? Or I guess is your opinion that the workforce will just be reprogrammed to do other things that, that are not repetitive tasks?
How do I say? So it's probably that the legal departments, like they just do lesser work because they're already overburdened. They're at capacity, and the amount of work coming in is actually greater than what they can handle. So even with these kinds of productivity boosts, it's likely that more work will be done, but the workforce will also keep growing. I think that's the kind of scenario that we are seeing in legal, and that's why there's so much enthusiasm. Because if that was true, that there will be lesser workforce, you wouldn't see so many legal departments really trying to adopt this, or any law firm trying to partner and get this kind of software, because it doesn't make sense from their incentive perspective. Mm-hmm. But all the projections that you'll see, or even just an eye test of how many companies are now ready to do pilots compared to a couple of years back, that's significantly grown. So that just means that everyone is excited about it, because even at a lower level, nobody wants to do that routine work. And instead, there are much better, interesting, and more engaging kind of work that they want to spend their time on.
Mm-hmm. Like notoriously, legal departments they just charge their clients like a lot of money. So do you think the dynamic will change in the future? Like, do you think the revenue models for these law firms will change if more and more of their tasks are being automated by AI?
So it's a bit weird in the law firms, where the efficiency, only the necessary amount of efficiency is kind of appreciated. There's an unnecessary amount of efficiency which is actually counterproductive for them, because they charge by the hour. If they charge for fewer hours, they get less than money.
Yeah, exactly.
The necessary part though is that the competition, and if it's a dynamic that's more global, that is, if other firms are much more likely to start adopting this and start actually competing for the same work that we will charge you half of what you can, then at that point, law firms are ready to make a move. And I think that's what Gen AI is starting to become. Everyone sees the benefit of it, but it's less proven at this point that you can do it on edge, because there's client attorney privilege that needs to be maintained. Like no law firm is going to put on client information directly into a third-party source readily. And B, the work quality is not there yet. Like you will see a lot of gaps. Like the marketing is way ahead, as it usually is, than where the technology is at this point. So while there are claims of like an AI-based lawyer, or it will do something of very high quality, right now it's not there where you can produce really high quality work. But hopefully we'll get there in a couple of years. So getting there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because even in the coding space that I have noticed, even just like in the last 2 years, like we're gonna get into a world where like majority of the tasks that I'm coding can be automated. Like I don't know if you saw GitHub, they released
the workspaces thing.
Yeah, the workspaces where you can just put tasks in GitHub, as inside the projects or issues or something, and it'll start doing the tasks. I don't know. You're going to get into a situation where, like, yes, obviously companies will hire less, or maybe startups will hire less, or they'll just reallocate resources to different places because of that. Do you think we will get into a situation where me as maybe a client will interact with completely like an AI lawyer, right? Like the law firm, like everybody is AI basically, and it can do like the majority of the tasks. And maybe, there's some humans to, do some of the nuances, but for like a lot of the corporate stuff, if I need like some startup, like law advice or whatever, like 99% of the tasks could be done by an AI.
Yeah. So let's for a second assume like AI got better, as good as a lawyer, even better at the task that you would have done, like better than a human lawyer. I think even in those cases, the part that lawyers really do, the core of their job, is to cover you whenever you're trying to do some kind of task. That, like, I got your back, I know that this was fine, and I take the responsibility for this work. I think that core part will never go away, because AI won't be starting to take responsibility for things, because there's no ability for you to enforce that kind of responsibility. Like lawyers, you can actually fire and they care about the money that they're getting, things like that, while AI doesn't. So even at that stage, I think law will be very important, and lawyers will be there. While the volume of work might change, and sure, you might require lesser people to just review work. Though I think that expertise level doesn't change as much. Lawyers will actually even need to step up their game even more. And that will be even more possible because it's so much easier to get feedback on work just by virtue of these tools existing. Like I can just put out some kind of work product and get really high quality advice on it, ask it to rate out of 10, and what does a 10 out of 10 look like? What does an 8 out of 10 look like? And build better mental models about it. So it works both ways.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, this is a bit of a technical question. There was a new study from Stanford. It showed that legal AI tools using RAG still hallucinate or provide incorrect information in over 17% of queries. So that's 1 out of 6 queries. Obviously this will improve over time, but do you think the hallucination problem will ever go away? Is that an issue with the RAG itself, which a lot of people are complaining about? Or is this something that we just have to, live with and just hopefully reduce the, percentage of incorrect queries over time?
Like a few things on the paper itself. I think I read that paper actually, and turns out that they actually are just benchmarking the LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters. Those two are really big players in legal research. So every lawyer has a subscription for those two companies. Okay. Wherein they will go there and any kind of precedent or any kind of case law research that they're looking for, they'll do on one of those two platforms. Or there's Case Text, that's the third one. So given those two exist, and we don't know how their AI is performing and how it's made. So I think it's a bit wrong to sort of generalize that as this is a problem with RAG. It might just be some kind of implementation details in the two
correct
platforms.
Yeah.
Because from our eye test, we actually are seeing way lesser than 17% hallucinations. It's you just need to make it slightly more tight. And I think our use case is also easier in from that perspective. But generally speaking, if you were to say do with millions of documents and ask it to program it well and sort of confine it to just answering from what it has received, you can reduce hallucinations largely. I don't think it will be a big problem, and it's getting better every now and then. You are now seeing models with 2 million context length, which are actually being able to pass a needle in a haystack test, it's called, which is basically in one of the lines in the 2 million tokens, I've written something, and the question requires you that specific line's knowledge in order to answer. And the models are being able to do 98% accuracy kind of things on that kind of a task. So I do think that that hallucination problem will keep on reducing more and more, and it's probably much better than that 17% statistic. Also, I think that paper is a preprint, so probably even they will refine that research till by the time it gets published.
I guess when you are training, I'm curious, could you explain to me how you're evaluating different models to use based off different data sets or different things? Do you think we'll get to a place where different companies will have different models for niche use cases within law? It seems like that would make the most sense, right? For different specific industries. Could you just explain that entire system to me? Because I feel like I don't know that much about it. What are people doing? Are companies coming out and tackling specific niche use cases?
What's actually happening is that the general models, like as you make them smarter, they start beating specialized models on specialized tasks. So
Okay.
what's actually ending up happening is that those fine-tuned models that we spend a lot of time on, or anyone is like say collecting data for and training it on, that's actually not proving its promise at the moment. Like I don't really see a big use case for it in the future. Maybe things get much better and changes things. But so there are largely two reasons for building smaller models at this point. It's one, reduction of cost or reduction of latency. It's only though it's never improvement of performance over that specialized task, because that like probably a bigger model with some more engineering will outperform that specialized model that you were going to make.
But why is that? Like, is there? Do you know why, or is this just the observations?
Yeah, it's like the whole LLM field at this point. I think it feels more of a discovery than invention, because it just turned out that making the model bigger is creating more and more nuances. There's some hypothesis around it though. So it's similar to how a very smart human with enough training on whatever field, they will excel at that. So it's not that a lawyer cannot do very good design. They just probably haven't been trained to do that design, haven't been exposed to that kind of information and experiences. So it's something very similar in terms of general intelligence superseding other like specialized knowledge, and it's becoming more about actually intelligence than knowledge. I think that's I think the difference that you're starting to see.
Yeah, this is probably also like related to why like OpenAI bought a publishing company recently, and there was like some other report. I forget exactly which like AI company it was, but they were basically using AI generated data to train the next iteration of their models. When all of this is happening, I guess, how are you evaluating the next iteration of every model that comes out and you're using it? Do you feel like it's improving the performance? Is the performance, negligible for like your use cases, or is it like just a case by case model basis?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact is the cost factor of it. So just say GPT-4 or reducing the cost 50%.
Yeah.
That's huge for our business model, because now we can do things that required much more token usage than before. For example, answering some aggregate questions over a bigger repository that hasn't been previously extracted. Something like, I want to know how many employees are there in Massachusetts, like which employee contract has that Massachusetts employment. Like you'll need to start to go through each document and extract that information. And well, there are some generic ones which you can pre-process and already build smaller models for, like BERT or things like that. But bigger things, or like you can't probably cover the whole space, so you can't offer full flexibility to the user. I think that's where these kinds of things start helping. In terms of building our own, I don't think at this point we should the progress is going to come on the model side from a very early stage startup. There are really competent people with heavy resources that they can spend on doing this. So I think at least for most startups, the usual advice is that right now leave that part to the big players. And there's so much engineering around the big models that you can do. For example, I'll give you a good example on legal use cases. So in like general legal documents, there can be defined words which don't use their usual meaning in natural language that they occur, but they actually need to be extracted from either some other case or from the same document. Like it might be confidential information in an NDA. That's very specifically defined what confidential information means, or say the word consideration in a contract, which is basically like what kind of value or resources are we exchanging in order to form a contract. Those kinds of words are very specifically designed, and you need to insert that into prompt detect that every time something comes up in a document or a question. So doing that part, or the order of things matter, wherein if in a contract there are two different conflicting statements, the statement that comes later will supersede the statement that comes before it. So, and getting that into the knowledge of your engineering and generating answers based on that, I think those kinds of nuanced legal knowledge is where you can spend a lot of time, and there's a lot of scope for innovation. And that's where I think I think professionals should, anyone building a startup in this space should be focused on, not the big model improvements.
So is that the biggest like challenges that you think in this space, or is there like something else that is like a bigger challenge for these startups that are trying to build a legal AI?
Honestly, I don't think the technical part is the biggest challenge. I think it's the change management piece of it, wherein one, the interface, like there has never been a successful chat product before Chat GPT, really. There have been customer chatbots, which a lot of people used, but nobody loved. And so right now, just building these kinds of interfaces where they can actually start using it and it's successfully done, I think that's a big space to explore. The second is using LLM doesn't just change the interface, that is, you can now chat with something, but also it's much more flexible. Like you can extract information on the go. Just define that I want to now start extracting this particular thing from a contract. So a lot of the backend things are way more flexible than they used to be. Like earlier, I would need to collect data, add that one more label into the model, and then retrain that model and deploy it. So
Yeah.
each new change was very costly to incorporate. Those things now change. It's easy, flexible to make. And I think that's another part of what you can do. Like automatically, a lot of things happen which you did not expect to. For example, automatically delegating it to the right person is an example. Just by you telling each person's roles and responsibilities that you filled in, and it automatically figures out who this task should go to. So those kinds of things are the second piece of things. And third is actually generating the product. Like say whenever something comes up, like based on all the contracts that you have signed, what is your usual position on this particular clause? Like how much limitation of liability do I usually agree with? And in this contract, what is that limitation of liability value currently? And can I resolve the two? What is the best path for me to resolve the two? Because I can't just replace it, because that's kind of rude. You are also in a negotiation. So you need to give a good reason for why we usually do this. And this is kind of the fair thing to do in the negotiation. So just taking off a lot of the legwork that is involved in all of this, that is going through all of the contracts, figuring out what my standard policy is, and doing the initial pass at it.
Could you explain like what you mean by the two different ways that lawyers think?
Yeah. So for example, at a law firm, like let's think about the life of an associate for a second. So they are asked to bill 2,000 hours in a year. Like 52 weeks into 40 hours is 2080.
Yeah.
So you literally have just 80 hours that you won't be billing inside your work week.
Yeah.
So you're already very pressed for time. And that's the main reason why they haven't been able to adopt a lot of the technology. Like even right now, most of the work happens through email, Word, and that is their tech stack.
Mm-hmm.
To start incorporating AI, if there's any kind of learning curve involved, or there's anything that requires a lot of maintenance, that just won't get through any kind of adoption. So a large part of legal work is to manage this kind of change management and meet the users where they're already at. So even if the experience is not great, if you can build a Word add-in instead of a separate like AI platform or a website that they need to go to, they will, like 100% of the time almost, they will prefer the Word add-in. Or if you can build something that integrates directly into Outlook, that they don't have to learn a new tool, then they will prefer that. So that's one very nuanced part of legal AI and just building in this space. The second part is about how corporate legal departments think. Like there, the attorneys they did not want the kind of life that they were asked to follow, a very high pressure life in the law firm. And that's usually the case. And the second case is also that they don't want to do so much project based work. They want a very long term responsibility over things.
Mm-hmm.
So there, the mindset is much more process oriented. And that explains why they are much more ready to adopt a lot of legal technology. But their repetitive work is largely contracts and deals. And they only have like usually the legal spend is just 1% of total revenue, like even big companies, or like there's one lawyer per 300 million of revenue. That's the average at an aggregate level. So they are just pressed for budget. So on one side you have like, and that's why they will try to find like cheaper technology. And again, that becomes a limiting factor. I think both of these explain why the UI enhancements are super necessary, and actually understanding the knowledge is kind of gold in this space, where you really understand how the process map is actually made for a legal department, how each contract is really pushed through each part of the life cycle. When a litigation comes in, what are the few things that they do? Like, how do they really choose between different law firms? I think those kinds of nuances are where, like, anyone who's creating a differentiator will start creating it. It'll probably not come from the tech that enables it. That will be copied easily, but you keeping on innovating on and understanding this process better and eventually building a brand, I think that's how you're going to build a big company in this space.
Thanks for watching. Hope you liked the episode. Chirag mentioned that his AI legal startup is actually hiring for engineers. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave links to all his details in the description below. I got a bunch more episodes coming your way, and I'm just getting started. So if you like the episode, all I have to ask is that you subscribe. Thanks.